Okay, we've been looking at Neo-Mamluk architecture in the last class, among other styles. Some of the other styles in the campus were certainly not Neo-Mamluk, like Legoretto's. So we'll look for the rest of the class at some examples of modern Islamic architecture, see what's happening. That I can't answer. Although I did see Zainab 15 minutes ago when I was walking in, so she's on campus, so I know that much. This is not Neo-Mamluk architecture. You may not know the building from this viewpoint, but I think it might be these days, but you at least should be able to recognize the style from this angle. Oh, here's another viewpoint, a little bit closer still. Maghrebi? Yeah, exactly. So this is the Mosque of Hassan II in, I even forget whether it's Casablanca or Rabat. One of those places on the sea. And it's, instead of being Neo-Mamluk, it's Neo-Maghrebi. It's very much a traditional style mosque with really nothing that identifies it as being modern. This is the interior, so they're playing around with polylobed and lambrequin arches. It's big. It's designed to impress. So that's, and it has lavish materials. So that's probably the
You're not going to have the world's largest minaret right next to a shack.
Yes, if you want to impress exactly with something like that, you're going to have the rest of the building equally impressive on the same scale. Otherwise, it would look out of proportion. But there are other possibilities in mosque architecture. Here's a mosque with a little tank in the foreground, which
Nice picture.
was captured by the Iranian revolutionaries from the Shah's forces just after the, or just before the Iranian Revolution. But the setting for this is the mosque in Tehran University. What do you think of this, given what you know of earlier Iranian architecture? Okay, calligraphy plays a very important part. Zainab, are you coming to join us? And we have calligraphy playing an important part on the interior of the courtyard as well. What's different about the calligraphy, say, in the earlier Iranian one that you remember?
Less crowded.
Which is less crowded?
The older one.
The older one, yes, yes. This, it's actually harder to read. They've really jumbled the letters together in this.
I said that they have to make them all the same color.
What about the minaret, for instance?
It's a very weird sort of trying to be right
There's
at
both of them.
the
Roughly, this was built, I think, around the 1950s.
Yeah, it was right.
Yeah. So you're right, there is a vaguely Art Deco look, I suppose, with the kind of glass grille
Usually
that you have in it.
I think of it as what they thought the future would be like in the 50s.
Yeah, but they're recognizable as minarets, I think, and they're certainly modern in design, so it's an interesting.
It's missing a dome.
I think a dome would have helped.
I think that something would have helped
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's kind of like you have like
Or maybe a finial, a smaller, narrower finial on top.
maybe have glass going all the way down instead of like randomly starting close to the top. Granted, that would probably be structurally unsound.
Well, with given the concrete and reinforced steel construction that they're using in the 50s, they might have been able to find a way to do it, but Yeah. Okay, another several buildings in Tehran. We have a very ugly intercontinental hotel in the background, international style. We have an ambitious but not quite making it carpet museum in the middle, foreground. What I want to discuss is this structure. What do you think it is?
A modern art sculpture.
It looks a bit like that. And in fact, the building that I'm going to show you next, which is just down to the right, is the Museum of Modern Art in Tehran. Now, I'll go a little bit closer, and there's an interesting feature that you will see, which was not visible from the previous one.
A hand.
A hand, yeah, on a pole. Okay, let's look at it from the opposite direction. You see there's a path around the back. By the way, you see there's it's a concrete shell with a narrow aperture here.
Does it say US?
It's a what?
US?
No, it certainly doesn't say US. No. You're looking at it backwards. That's the problem. Although I'm not sure the view that I have of it from inside the structure will be enough detail, but maybe. So there's a path at the back. Supposing you're walking along the path.
Oh, God. That's depressing.
What's depressing?
It's a place of prayer.
It's a place of prayer, yes. Yes, yes.
Walk into the concrete bomb.
Although the shoes that you see are metal. Yeah, yeah. So it's actually to help people recognize that it's a place of prayer, which otherwise they might have a problem. Well, the difference in orientation could have been a signal to this. The fact that you have an inner orientation different from the outer one. I mean, as Cairenes, we're used to seeing that all the time, aren't we? Yeah? Yeah, yeah. So here's another version of it. And so when you go inside this, now can you read what it says on the hand?
No.
No?
No.
The sun is completely glaring.
Hmm?
Look here. Look at the projector. It doesn't
Oh, that's awful. It's on. I can see it in my monitor. Sorry. It's bad contrast. It says Allah.
Oh, okay.
US.
Not US.
That would remind me of relationships with countries past.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's actually. So this is.
Why a hand?
The hand of Fatima, the hand of Ali. These are common symbols on alams, on processional implements in Iran. So they're used to having this idea of a holy symbol written on a hand. So I think this is a very imaginative reinterpretation of an oratory, of a small place of prayer. And the architect of this was Kamran Adel, together with a woman, Parveen Pezeshki. And Kamran Adel also did the building that I mentioned, which is next door to this, the Museum of Modern Art, which is this. That's a view of the whole structure. And you have a park surrounding it with modern sculptures. And there's a couple of Henry Moores over there that you might recognize. I think this is a Miro in the foreground. And here's another view of the building. What do you think these curved things are doing? What's the function of them? They're not quite semidomes because they're obviously elongated.
Waves.
Let the light in.
Yeah, they're skylights, although in this case a Nurgir, a kind of light catcher might be the appropriate word, because what they're imitating, I'm not sure that we've looked at much vernacular architecture, but if any of you have been to the Gulf, you might recognize some structures that have a very similar form, but play a different function there, at least in the older style architecture. These are what are called bodgirs, wind catchers. And in traditional Iranian architecture, they're used to funnel wind from colder wind down into the building to create a through flow. And instead of being wind catchers, bodgir, these are light catchers in this case. So I think it's an interesting reinterpretation of a traditional feature. That's a view from within the courtyard of the mosque. Frequently you have in some buildings 4 wind catchers facing in the 4 cardinal directions or in opposite directions and 2 axes. And this is another photograph that's taken in the courtyard of the same building. This is Miro sculpture. Anyway, I like the juxtaposition.
Did you take these pictures?
Yes,
Okay.
although I cheated. You can see from the sandals, in fact, that it's a Westerner who put on a chador for me.
Oh, it's not part of the sculpture.
I kind of guessed.
Oh, well, that chador is the traditional garb of...
I thought that was actually part of the sculpture. There was actually a sculpture.
Oh, no, that's a woman looking at the sculpture. A covered woman with a cloak.
Western based on the shoes. Because it seems kind of weird, like chador and then sandals. I don't know, maybe it's not.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's the chadors, yes, the traditional Iranian garb. So they have other mosques that they have built more recently. This was built in the 1980s. Oh, sorry, that's actually back to front, but not to worry. And this is the outside of the Masjid al-Ghadir in Tehran, which has a 12-sided prayer hall. And that's the mihrab niche projecting from the 12-sided prayer hall. In this case, it's specifically, of course, symbolic of the 12 imams. Not that that was a particularly important number in earlier Iranian culture. There are lots of imamzades of tomb towers commemorating saints or holy people, and you would have thought that if the symbolism of the 12 sides had been important, you would have found lots of 12-sided tomb towers. You don't. They're mostly 10. They're mostly 8-sided. There are some 10-sided, few 12-sided, but not in proportion to the importance of 12er Shiism in the region. But what this does have, I think, is an imaginative reinterpretation of the use of brick and tile in a modern context. So they're using lots of square kufik. And in addition, for some details, they have a more decorative kufik and blue tile on a buff brick background with an interlaced design. And here's another detail showing it contrasting with the plain brick on the sides of the door and a simple marble dado. And more variations on the square kufik in a different part of the exterior of the building. The interior uses more tile work. This is, well, which part do you think this is? This is the mihrab, yeah. So again, you have square kufik, but it's overwritten partially. Since it's a repeat of Allah all the time, it's not difficult to recognize the underlying grid. It's overwritten with a more decorative kufik script.
There's Ali
On the left-hand side, yes. So that's, again, not too surprising to find in this context. And then the dome was a series of overlapping squares within a larger rectangle. And it too is a very effective play on different types of kufik that are used for the horizontal portions, and then other inscriptions also in square kufik on the vertical ones.
There's tasbih. Bismillah. Subhanallah.
Mm-hmm.
Allah Akbar.
Yes, I mean, the problem, of course, with square kufik is that it's fairly difficult to read, although it's not quite square kufik because they have dotted the letters
Yeah.
so that you can distinguish them, which helps, as opposed to these ones, which you're supposed to be able to recognize. So this, again, I think is a very successful reinterpretation of traditional forms within an obviously modern setting. And where do we have examples of this in Egypt?
Square kufik or
No. Examples of a successful reinterpretation of traditional forms in a modern context, in a combined with a modern reinterpretation, a building that looks modern but also has traditional features within it. Well, you're not shouting out answers all at once for some reason. The problem is that there aren't any. I mean, I've been commissioned by AEC Press to write a book on the mosques of Egypt. They already have one in the churches of Egypt. So when I got this commission, I was really looking forward to incorporating good examples of modern mosques which had these combinations, and I haven't been able to find any. If you know of any,
Well, they've been very
tell me.
imaginative.
They've been imaginative, like the one of the Shurta on Salah Salem, which looks a bit like a bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no pillars,
just a bowl. Yeah.
I need to show you the church that my parents married in.
Okay, there are worse ones, possibly. That's okay. But for Egypt, it's unfortunate and surprising that we don't have anything that is at least some imagination behind it. And
Well, in average mosques,
yeah,
some Mamluk stuff, elements.
yeah. There's lots of neo-Mamluk
Yes.
features, but they're more traditional. The mosques, the modern mosques that are being built, not really with many features that identified as being modern at the same time. So that's the problem.
Would that be due to overall conservatism or?
Overall conservatism has a big part to play in it, yes. Yes, it
Because I
does.
know that, like, at least when Saudi Arabia funds mosques, they tend to stress a very, like, classical style, although that could depend. I mean, they also stress gigantic styles.
Yeah, there are some very modern buildings in Saudi Arabia, but yes, they're not usually mosque designs. That's true. But yeah, if you go through the Aga Khan Awards for Architecture, there are certainly several Saudi Arabia winners. Well, here's one building, I think, which is one of the most impressive in recent years. This is the new Museum of Islamic Art in Qatar. Anyone been to Qatar? No? Well, two reasons to go there. One is to see this building, and the other is to see the collection within it. In a relatively short space of time, they've only been collecting, I think, for 20, 30 years. They've built up a collection that is equal to the best you find anywhere else in the world, whether it's Cairo, Paris, London, or New York, which are the other main collections. So they enlisted I.M. Pei, the famous Chinese-American architect, who's done some wonderful earlier stuff. And they gave him a free hand. In particular, they gave him an offshore site. They created a new circular bay for him. And the mosque, in fact, is built on this little island joined by a causeway. It has a very large atrium with a dome on top, disguised on the outside, as we'll see. The museum rooms are in several floors, several stories, really running around three sides of the atrium. And there's also a separate educational wing separated by an open courtyard. So the educational wing is on the right, the courtyard between it and the large dome on top of the atrium. And this is the curving causeway that was built around it. They also carefully arranged the illumination so that it's equally spectacular at night. And you can see that the massing is essentially one of cubic forms that are staggered and recessed on top of the main lower area. There are also two entrances. If you're bringing your yacht, you get off here. Given that the patrons are likely to have yachts, this is an essential feature, it seems.
That is the sun inside, thought I would never hear.
And so they've marked these not quite by minarets, but by towers, which indicate the dock. And you can see that for the most part they're using circular arches. Pei wanted to incorporate some traditional features, but evidently not too many. I mean, there are some keel arches, pointed arches as well. So it's a combination. So you have those at the base of the cube where it starts to deconstruct into these geometric facets. And you'll notice that although there's a dome visible in the section on the interior, he's actually disguised it on the outside by having another cube on top. Again, I get the feeling he perhaps thought that a dome was somehow too much of a cliche for Islamic architecture, and he's got these cubic geometric forms all the way up, so he wanted to retain them at the top. Although the dome is transparent, so we have light coming in through these lunettes that you have in each of the four corners. And you can also drive into it, of course, as well as taking your yacht. So this is the main method of access. Again, we have a palm-lined avenue leading up to it. The palms are apparently unusual in their height and had to be imported from somewhere else. But fortunately, with the patrons of this, money was no object. And the architect, I.M. Pei, actually claimed that he got his inspiration for the building after looking at lots of Islamic architecture from this.
Oh.
You recognize this? What's this? It's very close to being a Ubud, yeah. Probably, it's a building you two at least will have visited. Many of you have been to Ibn Tulun. This is the dome in the middle of the courtyard, which was added in Lajean's time, so in the late 13th century. But the massing then of these cubic forms in the zone of transition is what he claimed provided him with his inspiration for this. I mean, there's a very vague resemblance, but obviously it's more the spark of an idea than any copying of a particular form. But it certainly is, I think, staggeringly beautiful building in the way it does combine these different facets, gradually resolving themselves towards the square covered dome at the very top. So as I said, it's on its own island really. This is the upper entryway for the public. There's a lower one with much bigger doors. If you're bringing large artworks into the building, you'll need something like that. And then you have the arcade that is in the courtyard between the main museum area and the educational center off to the side. So here we're looking at it from the courtyard that is between the museum there and the educational center, which would be behind us. He's incorporated 4 pools here. We have our Shahada Mosque, quadripartite garden. We have a pavilion in the middle, garden pavilion, different design here, which is partially echoed in a little wind catcher-like element, which is on top of the, there's a full height window that faces over the bay. In fact, I'll show you that in a couple of slides. And this is the very top of it. Again, it's a kind of reinterpretation of a wind catcher, which lets in light rather than wind in this case. And these are made of the same materials. So there's the contrast with the typical architecture that you find in the Gulf, modern, fairly nondescript skyscrapers for the most part. And as I said, he's using these rounded arches, which of course were an important part of early Islamic architecture. That was what the form was in the Umayyad period. But again, I get the feeling he just wanted to avoid cliches. Moving inside the building. This is the atrium that I was mentioning. And again, he's tried to incorporate. Yes, we have cofferings in the ceiling. So that's another feature. Maybe he looked at Qal'un when he was here and saw the cofferings and decided he could reinterpret those. There's very little detailed decoration here except on the chandelier, the circular chandelier that hangs down, and I'll show you a close-up of that a little bit later. But he's also partially reinterpreted the idea of a zone of transition. He's left it without one on this side, but here he has variation on what? On a pendentif, yeah. It's not spherical anymore. It's an inverted triangle, but I think that's the effect that he was hoping for. So these upper floors behind the doors to the left and the right are the main galleries, which are going around this area on 3 sides. So if you looked towards the left there, you would be facing the sea, and as I said, you have a full height window over this, which is quite spectacular, with this kind of grille that provides shade as well. And the downstairs area is a restaurant cafe. So if you're down here and looking up, this is what you see. This is the projecting square tower from the inside that we saw from the courtyard between the museum and the education center, and that night shot. And the coffering is visible from here as well. So if we looked back from here into the atrium, we'd be looking up into the main dome over the atrium, and this is what we would see. So there is, in fact, some elaborate geometric patterning on this chandelier. And you can see 2 of the pseudo-pendentifs that partially lead towards the dome. And the dome itself is also quite spectacular with another reinterpretation of Muqarnas. Contrasting material, partially translucent, I think, and there's an oculus at the top. So it enables the light to bounce off the different facets very effectively and emphasize its geometric pattern. And that's something that most, of course, masonry Muqarnas domes don't have. You don't. This, of course, is covered by some kind of perspex that doesn't let the natural world inside. It has to be air conditioned for the materials inside. But masonry domes don't have that luxury, so you can't see the light coming from above normally. But this is very effective when it does. Okay, so that's, I think, one of the outstanding examples. Here's another example, which is in Egypt. Anybody know where this is? No one been there? It looks a little bit like Hassan Fatih style. Yes, that's true. But I think it's actually by I forget the name of the architect of this, although it's a more recent building. This is the Nubian Museum in Aswan, which also was a winner of an Aga Khan Award, and uses traditional forms. This kind of decoration is found in Nubia. It's also used in some modern buildings in Saudi Arabia. What do you call the shape of this arch? Catenary Arch, that's right, that's one word for it, or a parabolic arch. Know any examples of it on the campus?
That one random arch, like when you're walking towards the on-campus dorms.
Yeah, well, actually, you have two arches. There's that one random arch, if you like, after the Basili Hall, before the sports complex and the dorms, yes. And there's another one of the same shape, which you all do know, since it's much closer to the center. It's the one beside the library that frames cilantro. Okay, so both of those are the same kind of shape you get if you hold up a chain and let it fall between your two hands. The inverted profile is the same as a catenary arch. You get it in Sasanian buildings, pre-Islamic buildings in Iran frequently. Okay, let's move to another part of the world, which we haven't even considered in other examples of architecture. Where do you think this is? Close. Malaysia, yeah. Although there's actually one building we did look at that I think provides a parallel for this that may have inspired the architect. This is in Putrajaya, which is the new federal capital of Malaysia. And this is the Masjid Putra, the Putra Mosque. The parallel I'm thinking of is this. Anyone remember what this one was?
It was the thing that was built by that guy that was deposed.
Who deposed the Mughal Sultan. He deposed Humayun, who had to go into exile. This was Sher Shah Sur's mausoleum in Sasaram in northern India. So it has a square base. The rest of it is octagonal, but with these little chatris, these pavilions in each corner, and beautifully framed by the rectangular pool. So here again we have the recessing leading up to the dome with the more or less square base and the pavilions in the corners. Although it looks a little bit different from the land side. What about the entrance? Where do you think the inspiration for that came from? the shape of the arch, more or less four-centered with a, yeah, Iranian or possibly Mughal, of course, who also copied the Iranian examples. Although the minaret, I can't think of any specific model that they would have been copying for that, but it is an original reinterpretation. Just to the right of this door, as you go into the courtyard of the mosque, you have the name of the building written in Arabic script, written in Latin script. Then there is, just below it, written in Arabic script, but in Malay language, the foundation inscription. I mean, they've been using Latin script in Malay for a very long time, I think for most of the 20th century, but for this religious context, they still think it more appropriate, obviously, to use Arabic for the alphabet. Looking back across from there towards the courtyard, this is the view towards the Qibla in the mosque, the main entrance. So we have a series of what are essentially screens, false arches in front. We have these rather peculiar spiky windows, almost imitating the lower blocks of Muqarnas, and a pink arabesque on top of the dome, the main dome. And the pink theme is also retained on the inside. What sort of models do you think they're copying here for this dome? What's it supported on? Squinches. On squinches. Typical of modern mosques in Malaysia is an upper balcony on both sides, which I think may have been intended for women's prayer, possibly, although I've seen in other mosques where they have curtained off part of the ground floor area as well for women. So I'm not actually sure how this is used in practice. Possibly. So domes and big domes and squinches, where do we get those in the Islamic world? Not the big domes are mostly on pendentives here. The smaller ones, the little isolated mausoleums, maybe in the cemeteries, some of those have squinches. But Farag ibn Bar'u, to take the biggest stone dome that we have, or the Kite Bay complex, they have pendentives inside. Iran, for the most part, yes. Think of the Masjid-i-Shah, for instance, in Isfahan that we looked at. What's the difference, say, between the Masjid-i-Shah and this in the arrangement of space? Or a typical Iranian dome? Whether it's the Seljuk Isfahan Fradi Mosque or any of the ones in between. Good, exactly. The dome in the Iranian examples is at the climax of your entrance into the building. And it's directly over the mihrab. But here, in fact, it's supported on these, well, they look rather spindly columns. If you were talking about masonry, obviously these wouldn't be of sufficient strength to hold the weight of the building above it. But obviously these are disguising reinforced steel beams, and so you don't have to worry about that anymore. But I think this is one of the problems that I've seen with lots of incorporations of domes in modern architecture. They don't understand that the normal progression is to have this as the climax of the building right above the mihrab, instead of it punctuating the space or centering it. There's actually one building that we saw this semester as well that I think they have copied the interlacing arch form of this from, with the arabesque in between the imitation ribs. Anyone remember this arrangement in a dome? intersecting ribs punctuated by an arabesque. This is very like the Tilimsan Almoravid dome that we looked at in the Maghreb in Algeria. That's one you can go back to your slides and look at. And then the mihrab itself, which has some impressive kufik and naskh, but it's a little bit strange compared with earlier mihrabs that we've seen with these combinations of arabesque plus inscription. What's different about it?
It stops once you get around the niche.
Yeah, it doesn't go all the way to the bottom, and they haven't framed the different elements. They haven't really separated them with vertical or horizontal elements the way you have in other mosques. So looks a little bit cluttered for that reason, I think. In the same town, Putrajaya, there's a more modern example called the Iron Mosque. It has another name, but we'll just call it the Iron Mosque, which is also one that has a dome centered in it. The next one is just a little detail of the entrance, which has an interesting series of what are, I think, cutouts that have a light behind them, which give some of the Asma al-Husna, the 99 names of God. And then going through this, you come to the courtyard before the entrance to the building. You can see that they're using these ribs, which are made of steel. And looking back from here towards the entrance, that's where we were in the previous photograph, looking over the pool. So the courtyard has these regular arcades, but with the roof open at the top. Then going into the building, the use of these armatures of steel, in fact, permits the side and the back walls to be opened with glass. So you're letting a lot of light into the interior. But here again, we have a very large dome which sits in the middle of the building, not at the climax above the mihrab. And it also doesn't have any zone of transition in this case. They don't need one with steel. So it's a very different approach. And the dome itself is also faceted. So looking at it from the side, one thing that is surprising in many mosques, modern mosques, is that even with the technology of air conditioning, it's never enough. So we have a row of fans all along here, which I'm sure can't have been the architect's idea for airflow within it.
If you let in a lot of light, you're also going to let in a lot of heat.
Yes, except there are actually overhangs. Maybe they're not visible, but the sun doesn't shine directly on these walls for the most part. So I think he tried to allow for that to a certain extent. But it's alarming, yes, even in modern mosques that supposedly have air conditioning, how many portable fans they've installed in them.
Air conditioning will not work in an open space that large.
I think you can have.
With a bunch of people in it.
I think in theory you have plants that can provide the power for that.
Theory, but like in practice, I've never been able to experience it.
Yeah, I mean, another problem is, of course, that if you're accommodating worshippers, you want to keep the doors open as much as possible. So that is also a major problem. Yeah, here's a view well, from this view, you can see that the mimbar, in fact, is a solid stone object, as is the mihrab. What isn't quite apparent from here is that this, at the back of it, is actually water. You can see it better from this photograph from the sides. So this is actually open, and this is, in fact, a very effective cooling technology. So you have water surrounding the building on three sides and the breeze blowing through it. So it does provide a very effective natural cooling technique with some of the modern bridges of the area in the background. Does this look familiar? The Petronas Towers, yes, which for a time when they were built were the tallest buildings in the world. Didn't last very long until I think somewhere in China or Taiwan.
It never does.
Yes, but they were, and these were designed by Caesar Pelli. They also got an Aga Khan Award for Islamic architecture. What's the shape of each tower? Yes, so you have a stellate design exactly with alternating flanges and semicircles. Any other building that you know of in the Islamic world that has that combination?
The Catenary Mosque, the protruding things are like that.
They're all flanges though, aren't they? I think.
Those standalone minarets in
No, they're-
Afghanistan where they're not really sure what they are.
Minaret of Jam, those are, the Ghazni ones, again, they have a stellate plan. They just have the flanges without the circular
No, I think the ones
elements in between.
The Catenary Mosque have the alternation between those.
Okay, I think we can check that. They're supposed to show up here. Okay, let's go to this view. Where is Rafai? We had Rafai, didn't we? Yeah, here.
Oh no.
Yeah, they're all flanges. Well, there is one that has the same stellate base. Apart from the ground plan,
The
Yeah.
pink mosque had something similar.
the Putrajaya one, it had a stellate plan as well. It had the flanges, but not the rounded elements. But the alternation of these is found in, anyone know what this is? This is the Qutb Minar in Delhi, which maybe until the Hassan II mosque was built was the tallest minaret in the world. So, in fact, I think there are similarities between these, not just in the shape, but in the conception. They were both, at the time they were built, the tallest towers in the world. They were both designed for that reason to emphasize the power of their patrons. The Malaysian government wanted to be seen as modern and effective, just as the Delhi Sultanate did in building this as part of the Quwat al-Islam Mosque. So it may be more than just a coincidence that Cesar Pelli based his design on those of that earlier building. Okay, tell you what, a couple of things. First of all, I want to remind you that you're supposed to do evaluations, and according to the reports I'm getting from the registrar, nobody's done them yet. So it would be helpful if you could do that. And we will just have one practice example of comparison, since the next time we meet will be for the test. Because of the field trip, you have Wednesday off, and so we meet next Sunday for the final test. So try this one. Okay, so what's the one on the left? Muhammad Ali. Do we have a, so the date for it is, I forget the exact date, it's about 1820s, 30s, something like that.
Early 19th century.
Early 19th century would be okay. And the one on the right is, it's by Sinan, it's one of Sinan's mosques. It's the Shahada Mosque in Istanbul, which is, I think 1530s, if I remember right, something like that. Zainab, any similarities?
The North Central Dome.
They both have a large central dome, okay. And a square base, okay, essentially, yes. Magid, any other similarities?
The 2 minutes between the courtyard and the mosque.
2 minutes between the courtyard and the mosque, that's right, yes. By the way, just let me emphasize, when you're doing these, make sure you're dividing similarities and differences very clearly. Similarities in the middle of the page, differences split the page up. Very important. Okay. Nada, any other similarities?
Small domes around the big one?
Yes, there are small domes around the bigger one, although Nadeem, maybe there will be more differences with regard to those.
The cascading effect works better here than there.
Yes.
The flying buttresses.
Yes, they have more pyramidal shape, a sense of a cascade with flying buttresses on Sinan's as opposed to Muhammad Ali's. Isabel, any other?
There's a larger use of windows in the Sinan example.
Yes, much greater area of windows in the Sinan example. Okay.
It seems like there's a planar facade, like once you get past like the initial base to the second floor.
Yes, there's less recessing, less articulation of the upper parts of the outer facade in the Muhammad Ali Mosque as opposed to the example in Istanbul. Another similarity is not just the central dome, but the fact that the central dome is supported by 4 semi-domes. So it's the same basic plan that both of them have.